COVID-19 brought into the public eye FDA's thinking about rapidly making diagnostics, vaccines, treatment options available to Americans. But even before the pandemic, the agency had some programs in the works, and I'm thinking about the Project Orbis, which was a global regulatory effort to facilitate faster patient access to innovative cancer therapies. Do you think that these efforts by FDA, what we saw during COVID, what preceded it with Orbis and other programs, do you think that we're going to see these innovative practices continue, or will they slow down and maybe go away?
So I can tell you what I think and what I hope, and I certainly hope they don't go away. I believe that we will continue to see this. And there's a couple clues here with that. One is, you mentioned Project Orbis and the Center for Oncology, the Oncology Center for Excellence, OCE. And that was a very innovative approach that Rick Pazdur put in place and led to the accelerated approval of a number of oncology agents. And I think you can make a connection between that process where you use surrogate endpoints or intermediate endpoints, and at times supplemented by real world data to make regulatory decisions subject to a fuller study of the agent. And while one could argue that perhaps that doesn't get to the right answer immediately, what it does do accelerate therapies with good science and good data into the hands of people who desperately need it. So I believe that for unmet medical need or for significant medical problems, we will continue to see that.
Patients are increasingly demanding a voice in drug development and the practice of medicine, actually. And patient groups are becoming much more sophisticated in how they approach their participation with drug developers and regulatory authorities. What are your thoughts on the growing influence of patients in drug development and the approval process? And then in the overall kind of risk-benefit analysis that the agency uses when it approves drugs, like
right,
what you're referring to?
Yeah, first off, I'll throw out my bias to begin with, which is thank God there's more patient involvement in patient care and in healthcare. I think that's important on the wellness as well as the sick care side of things. And, for a long time, patients have felt like their voice hasn't been heard by their doctor, the healthcare system, insurers, you name it, and also industry. And so I think it really is, this trend in that direction is so important, because we need to know what's important to them. We heard it during the aducanumab decision. The patient groups in general were supportive of that decision, understanding, of course, that it can't always just be about that because there's safety and science considerations. But these groups are very sophisticated. They're really getting to understand the science, and they can be incredible partners in this. Patient groups can help us get to what is, I think, a significantly lacking effort in the medical device development world, and that is diversity in clinical trials and diversity in access to products. And we saw that during COVID, where those who were the most vulnerable, those who had the least access, those who were likely to get the most sick from COVID, were the ones that not only maybe didn't participate as much in clinical trials, but also were the ones who were the most distrustful of science, medicine, and the regulatory framework. And the way to answer that is to acknowledge that that's the case, but to engage early and often.
We saw during COVID, actually the use of real world data. The Israeli studies helped move us forward with boosters. I think the CDC made masking decisions based on real world data, which was kind of earth shattering in the days prior to the pandemic. And we kind of glossed over that real world data was used to make real time decisions by the agency. So now we also have mobile devices, wearables, all sorts of other kind of real world data that the tech industry is quite interested in looking at. I know we looked at it a lot when we were talking about addiction and mental health issues. It's really complicated, this real world data, being presented to the agency as part of decision making. Can you see that happening more and more post these experiences with COVID?
Yes, I think we will, but I think there's you've caveated a lot there, and you probably saw the most recent decision by the agency a couple of months ago in Parkinson's disease. I think it was Verily that proposed using alternative modes of collecting data through, I believe it was wearables. But the bottom line there is the agency is going to take a very careful look at that and understand how that adds to the evidence that they will use to make decisions. But I think this is here to stay. End of September 2021, guidance issued by the agency on the use of real world evidence. There's a lot more clarity around this. It will become even more important as ML and AI-based algorithms are used, because as we know, there are potential biases introduced by those. We're very careful, particularly here at Flagship, that I've seen, in making sure that we reduce those biases. And the agency will need to begin to understand and look in the black box of AI and ML at how those decisions were made and what data went into it. In the old days, we would have called it sort of, looking at multiple data sets, putting them together. You can variety of different statistical techniques, but we knew that they always introduced biases. This is a much more sophisticated approach. And so I think hand in hand, real world evidence, AI, ML, et cetera, will increasingly see this a part of the agency's know-how and use in terms of making those regulatory decisions. And I think that's a good thing. But again, I keep going back to this point. I think it's really important. There will be a time when a decision needs to be revised because additional data come to the fore. And that will happen in this situation. And the answer shouldn't be, let's throw out real world evidence and AI and ML. Let's figure out how that occurred and try to prevent it in the future.